Welcome to the Taylor Made Tasty podcast. I'm Taylor, retired serial quitter turned goal boss coach, speaker, and consultant. I believe a beautiful life starts with a beautiful mindset. Join me as we amplify confidence, resilience, and actionable tools on the road to quit quitting on you and your vision. You are worthy of your goals, so let's go get there. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Taylor Made Tasty, the podcast. Today we are discussing happiness. And as we come up to the new year here, I wanted to specifically talk about long-term and short-term happiness. We probably all know what brings us immediate pleasure, whether it's sex, a warm muffin, a hot cup of coffee, a glass of wine, a night with friends, a day at the beach, a great new TV binge session. So along with my guest, Abi Mallick, they will be discussing what parts of life give us short-term dopamine hits and what parts of life create long-lasting happiness and fulfillment. In the moment happiness is only part of the happiness equation. Overall, life satisfaction counts equally. Let's talk about the difference between being happy in our life and being happy about our life. A little bit about our guest. Abi Mallick is a researcher, social worker, and life coach in Austin, Texas. They teach neuroscience-based coaching to heal unhealthy relationship patterns and self-sabotaging habits. Rediscover your confident, authentic self in romantic, family, and work relationships, and most importantly, in your relationship with yourself, the longest and most intimate relationship in your life. Please help me welcome Abi to the show, and let's get into it. Hi, Abi. Thank you for joining the show today.
Hi, Taylor. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to jump into this conversation. So we're talking about happiness today, and as many years of research as there is in happiness, it's like not just about feeling good, but it also makes us healthier and more productive. And I've read research that says that it makes us nicer too. And in exploring happiness and its relation to how we feel, we must start by looking at short-term and long-term happiness. So I was curious if, like, in the simplest form, can you explain each version of happiness?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a research nerd, and from a research perspective, from a neuroscience perspective, short term happiness and long term happiness look different in your brain. Short term happiness gives you a fast acting hit of dopamine, which fades quickly. And long term happiness is something that leads to general well being and satisfaction and can actually create new pathways in your brain over time. So it's like a habitual happiness that changes the structure of your brain. So, outside of the brain stuff, the kind of a simple way we can think about what this looks like in our lives is that, you know, laughing at a good joke or being complimented on something makes you happy for a minute, but it doesn't change the course of your day or your life. But for example, having a solid group of friends who you can regularly laugh with and cry with and have a variety of experiences with leads to long term well being, better mental health, more capacity for joy, empathy, and more resilience when times are tough.
Yes. Okay. Beautifully said. I think I would like to also break down each one a little bit more and like get into detail. So with short-term happiness, like you were saying, the joke, or just something that feels good in the moment, but just maybe more situational. With short-term happiness, what part of our lives are we looking at when reflecting on short-term happiness, and like why does that happiness matter?
Yeah, so when we think about short term happiness in our lives, that includes things like accomplishing a goal, receiving praise, eating a delicious meal, getting lots of likes on social media. And those are all really good things, right? We want and need those things. We crave those things. Um, One thing that can become a problem, though, with short term happiness, because we get these short term hits of dopamine with accomplishing a goal. And we have this very accomplishment oriented society where basically people can define themselves by their accomplishments. So the problem here is that a lot of people think that accomplishing goals is going to lead to long-term happiness and general well-being. There's this idea that, oh, if I just string enough short-term happiness elements together, that will lead to long-term well-being, and that's not the case. So we've created this situation where people are chasing accomplishments and praise because they think those are the be all and end all of joy, satisfaction, and meaning in life. And I'm not saying don't go after accomplishments and praise, those are great, but just recognize them for what they are and recognize that accomplishments and achievements in and of themselves will not bring you that long term satisfaction and meaning that long term happiness inducing elements will.
Hmm. So I feel like that goes against like so many things, I guess, that we kind of have been taught or have come to believe, with like your accomplishments and that piece of life being sort of the version of long-term happy. If we're talking about short-term versus long-term, I would have thought that your accomplishments would relate directly to long-term happiness.
Oh, yeah, it's so ingrained. And for that reason, it's really hard to unlearn that mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about things like that, getting an award or a promotion or something, I guess that could have to do with long-term happiness because they're sort of, a stepping stone to what our ultimate maybe vision or dreams or whatever are. How do we decipher that in the moment of this is short-term versus long-term happiness, I guess?
So, long term happiness is going to be mostly things that build community and build relationships or make you feel like a part of a cause or something bigger. So, a kind of a cue to help you decipher that would be, is this an individual accomplishment or is this an accomplishment that's helping me build community or build towards a goal or a purpose that's bigger than myself, a big meaningful goal?
Yeah, that's good. Uh Sort of like, I guess I think of, or maybe people often think of, like, what is our legacy at the end of, and at the end of all of this, what will our legacy be? So would that long-term happiness look like how you have impacted, I guess, like community and the world and things like that?
That's part of it. Yes. Having having a legacy, having a meaningful impact on community, on bigger things in the world other than your own life is definitely one of the things that leads to long-term happiness. The other big things are having deep, meaningful relationships, being part of communities, and practicing gratitude.
Mm.
So, and what's interesting to me is that 3 out of 4 of the biggest things that create long term happiness involve being around other people and being in community or working towards a goal with other people.
Mhm.
These are the things that create a happiness that build new pathways in your brain, increase your self esteem, and build your resilience, which totally makes sense because we're social creatures. We don't just need other humans to survive, but we need other humans in order to heal and grow and become the best versions of ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, what you said right now, I feel like directly speaks to how the past few years have been when, everything was shut down and we weren't necessarily getting that long-term happiness, community, belonging feelings for so long because we were kind of all dealing with our own things, starting in 2020. And while I do think that that's sort of coming back to into play, I would imagine that there was some challenges as far as like the long term happiness goes over those past few years. If you're saying, 3 out of 4 of them have to do with community and being together and working towards a common goal and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We felt that isolation for sure the past 2.5 years or so during the pandemic. But also, in general, we have a kind of a lot of isolating structures to our society. And we have this cultural glorification of rugged individualism and independence and individual accomplishments. But it's important to remember that those ideas are very foreign to what most cultures have looked like throughout human history and the way that we've evolved and the way that our brains evolved.
Right. The idea or concept of it takes a village because it takes so many different people to whatever it is, whatever the goal is, takes so many people to like make that happen, right? Or just I think also too in your life there's different people that complete different parts of you too. So like the building your own community, being that it's your personal like support system, is also going to look like a lot of different people.
Exactly. Yes. It takes a village to build a life and it takes a village to be happy. I think those are really important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've all heard the term or the phrase like too much of a good thing, right? And although we want all of the happiness, this can also bring some challenges as we cultivate it. So, can you talk about the challenges of adding more long term happiness activities into our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've touched on that a little bit already that the biggest challenge for kind of building community and building deep long-term relationships is that we're in a culture where we're isolated and we're very self-focused and we're told to chase individual accomplishments because that is what will make you happy. So it can feel like swimming upstream to actually build those interdependent relationships and foster nurturing communities. But you can do it, in a way that makes sense for you, right? Like a community can look like a religious organization or being part of an activist group or a gardening club or a nerdy fandom, right? There's lots of different ways to be part of a community and nurture relationships in a way that makes sense for you and feels good for you.
Yeah. I think so many people want that, but it's their individual feelings and emotions that hold them back from creating that, right? Because we get in our head of, oh, like I don't want to show up or it's awkward or I'm going to join this group but then I have to go by myself. And so where I think a lot of us desire that community that ultimately equals long-term happiness, we also hold ourselves back individually from actually taking the step to get there.
Yeah, I think we hold ourselves back for a lot of reasons. Partially because it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to try something new. Um, and also partially because we we put it off. We kind of don't prioritize building communities because a lot of us are thinking, oh, well, once I get this promotion, then I'll be happy. Or once I accomplish XYZ, buy a house or have these certain emotions in life, then I'll be happy, and then I'll be able to cultivate relationships. But really, cultivating relationships, building community is something that you need to do along the way, or else you'll get lonely, you'll get burnt out, and you will have kind of a sense of self that's only about accomplishments,
Hmm.
which doesn't lead to the long-term well-being that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so this concept that we have to be XYZ version of ourselves before we can create that community and cultivate that. I have to be here. I have to be at this level. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I mean, just think about in the simplest version of this, we're talking about like networking, right? And so often we think like the level that we're at in our career, in our business, or, uh, has is doesn't hold a match to everybody else that's already in this group, so then we hold ourselves back from even being there. But the reality in any group, whether it's a hobby or a networking or whatever it is that they all started somewhere. And so for us to put ourselves out there to become part of these communities, they all started somewhere, and you may not be at the same level, and that could even be like we were talking about knitting or something, right? You may not know how to knit a certain whatever piece of clothing or something, but neither did that person when they were starting. So I think it's really, if we're talking about happiness and short term, long term, we have to also be vulnerable and put ourselves out there in order to seek that community and show up as you are.
Right, exactly, exactly. And, having hobbies, having very different communities that work different parts of your brain, um, having different interests, that's also something that, we don't prioritize, but that can have a big impact on your happiness and your sense of self, rather
Hmm.
than just defining yourself by your job, as so many people do in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, being happy is not it's not some magical cure all, and happy people still get sick and still lose loved ones, and not all happy people are efficient or creative or generous, but happiness brings a lot of sustainable advantages. And I wanted to talk about some ways that we can create balance between the short term and long term happiness activities, because if we're talking about, we are sort of ingrained and focused on the short term of what we are individually doing. How can we create balance between that? Still matters, that happy, the short term happiness still matters, but also being more intentional about the long term happiness activities.
Right, absolutely. You want both. So, um, the question, I think, how to create balance between short-term happiness and long-term happiness, I think a first good step would be just to have that awareness that there is a difference and that you do want and need both. And since our culture has confused the two, it we've gotten into this habit of just chasing a string of short-term happiness things. But once once you have that awareness, okay, these are the things in my life giving me short-term happiness, these are the things in my life giving me long-term happiness, I want to cultivate both. Then you can be more intentional about it when you have that awareness. And then, the next step would be just to like look at the where do you have the ingredients for long-term happiness in your life, and how can you strengthen those, right? What are the relationships that feel meaningful and supportive to you? Can you strengthen those? What are some causes or communities that are interesting or intriguing to you, whether you've dabbled in them or you haven't yet, but you're curious about them. What's a small step you can take to kind of get more involved?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, it's going to take you getting, the goal being outside of yourself, of that it's not just about the short term happiness right now, but you showing up to these groups or communities or activism that has to do with the sort of long term. I think it has to be front of mind, because we can get inside of our heads and not show up to those things because of how we feel about ourselves.
Right. We can easily get on autopilot and just not think
Yes.
about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so with the goal of this episode being to help listeners create balance of short term and long term happiness, and now that we have a deeper understanding of it, I always think like, okay, if I am the overwhelmed person listening to this episode, how can I make this as simple as possible with one thing that someone could do today? So if you were to recommend one simple action towards the goal of creating more long term happiness or balancing between the two, what would that be? Just like one simple thing for someone to do today.
So, one thing I always do for myself, and I recommend for my clients as well, is to schedule things because in this fast paced, high tech capitalist world, right, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. It's so easy to say, "Oh, I don't have time to like hang out with my friends or be part of this group." So I generally find if I don't get intentional and put things on my schedule that they don't happen. So my simple recommendation is brainstorm one thing that will add to your long-term happiness and put it on your schedule and maybe make it a recurring event, even if it's once a month, or start with every other month. I schedule writing in my gratitude journal. I schedule social time because for me, I'm a parent, I'm a small business owner. If I don't schedule things, it'll just, months will fly by and I'm like, oh, wait, I haven't seen my friends. I haven't done that thing that's important to me. So
Yeah,
that's my recommendation for the busy, overwhelmed folks like myself.
absolutely. I love that. Yes. So if you're listening to this, you want one simple action, commit to putting something on your schedule in the next month or two that has to do with your long term happiness. I love that. Well, you mentioned being a small business owner, so I love for you to share about your business and let us know how listeners can connect with you.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for asking. I'm a researcher, a social worker, and a life coach in Austin, Texas. I teach self coaching tools to help people heal self sabotaging patterns so that they can build happier, more meaningful lives. My business is called The Existential Coach. So you can find me at theexistentialcoach.com or on Instagram at The Existential Coach.
Beautiful. Well, I know I appreciate you coming on today and talking about long term happiness versus short term happiness, and what parts of our lives give us the short term dopamine hits and what parts create long lasting happiness and fulfillment. And I know there's some good takeaways here. So you definitely challenged me and how I think about it. And I know the same will happen for our listeners too. So thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me here, Taylor. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to nerd out about one of my favorite research topics.
Absolutely. All right, y'all, it is time for the quote of the episode. And this quote is from Gandhi, and I can't believe I haven't heard it before. Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Take that into your week, your month, and maybe even your year, and create a balance of both short-term and long-term happiness indulging activities in your life. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in my community. I'm so glad you showed up today, and let's go get there. Look at you, crushing it. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Tailor Made Tasty podcast. My hope is you always leave with a takeaway to implement in your own goal-crushing journey. I would love if you could take a moment to leave a review. And if you're looking for a community of goal boss badasses just like you, be sure to check out tailormadetasty.com/membership.